Please welcome to the stage, John Fugelsang!
Can we give some love for Kevin, everybody? My brother did 2 years in the desert of Peru with the Jesuits. My mother was a nun before she married, and my father was a Franciscan brother. So I grew up admiring Jesus the way any guy admires mom's first husband. But I gotta say, and I mean no disrespect to the faithful, I've come to view Jesus in much the way I've come to view Elvis. I love the guy. A lot of the fan clubs freak me out. This piece is about Donald Trump, even though he's not mentioned once in it. But if you get frustrated watching the media promote him and not ask him hard questions and wonder why they do that, this kind of speaks to, this kind of answers it. I was out in LA, living the dream, doing a crappy TV show that paid the bills. And I was trying to do political stand-up in the LA comedy clubs, which should give you a rough idea of how well-intentioned but naive I was during this period. Imagine trying to do political material in a town where it's a virtue to not know who the mayor is. I'd be like, aren't you guys upset about the economy, man? Aren't you pissed about AIG? Oh, brah, I don't even listen to hip-hop. Yeah. So, the economy changed, and the company that I worked for got sold. My show was abruptly canceled. My dad was starting hospice treatment back east and in Florida, so my wife and I decided to start over, have a big Hollywood yard sale, and move back to a one-room studio apartment here in New York. And then in an 18-month period, my dad died, my aunt who helped raise me died, my wife's grandmother died, and our best friend killed herself. We found out that my mother was dying of a rare degenerative disease. Both of our cats died. Money got tight. Credit cards started getting declined. We got mired in debt. We got desperate. And then we got pregnant. This is the story of how my psychosis made me such a nuisance, it wound up affecting an American presidential election. Just as no man can ever understand the innately female subjective experience of pregnancy and childbirth, no woman can ever understand the uniquely male experience that I call male provider anxiety. The baby was coming. I hadn't worked in a year. And I got a call from a certain TV channel, a news channel. I shouldn't say it's now, vaguely I'll say it was a cable news network. And I was invited to start sitting in every morning from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. on Soledad O'Brien's morning show as the recurring panel's token political comic. Now, I love Soledad O'Brien. I thought she was great and brilliant, and with the baby's arrival only a couple of weeks away, I knew if I played my cards right, this could lead to something better at the network. They wanted something edgy, but not in your face, political without taking sides, and a New York flavor without being too urban. I began slipping out of bed every morning in the dark at 4 a.m., putting on a suit and tie in the dark of our tiny flat, and heading uptown to do 3 hours of live TV unpaid. And unpaid was the deal. I tried not to think too much about it. 15 hours of live broadcasting on TV every week, where every moment was considered an audition for possible future paid work. I could handle that. Comedians were the ones who originated trading content for airtime, and it was kind of refreshing to realize that CNN had the same exact policy as MTV. And Soledad O'Brien was fantastic. Sharp, brilliant, clever, tough, and tolerant of my trifling ways. On our first exchange on camera together, she pointed out that she was both Puerto Rican and Irish. So I said, oh, no temper issues in your family. She looked directly at me and said, I'm also part black. And I was part of this three-person panel that got on set with her for all these hours of the broadcast. The others would be CNN personalities, journalists, congresspeople. Once it was Oprah's boyfriend, Stedman. Just sit next to me for 3 hours talking about stuff. And we would, periodically, Soledad would call on the panel to debate a topic. Periodically, I once sat next to a Republican senator who didn't get to speak for a whole hour, but we would talk about, different topics or take part in various human interest chats. We did segments with, cool people like Magic Johnson or Cal Ripken or Rodney King, even Miss Universe. But I soon realized that despite my resume as a political comedian, they almost never let me participate in any political interviews. And this was during the time of the last presidential race. So if some big player in the presidential race showed up, we'd usually have to either clear the set or sit there silently while Soledad did a one-on-one with said campaign big shot, and it made me nuts. I had done Bill Maher's show over a dozen times. I had debated Jerry Falwell and David Duke. I had a political comedy album that went to #1, and they still wouldn't let me even ask questions. And I understood. This is a big network. They couldn't have a vulgar vaudevillian talking to heads of state. If I asked a question that offended a guest, or God forbid a viewer, it could hurt the network. But this was the presidential race, and I was stuck on the sidelines, not able to do what I did for a living. I'd go off on the weekends and play 3,000-seat houses talking about stuff I couldn't talk about on TV every day. And I knew if they just gave me one chance to talk to one of the big political figures, that I'd have my moment to shine. But every moment is an audition. The baby came in March on Mitt Romney's 65th birthday. I took it as a sign. Obviously, this election and I have a date with destiny. I may have been reading too much into it. It was also the birthday of adult film actor Ron Jeremy. In case any of you are still hung up on astrology, Ron Jeremy and Mitt Romney share a birth. That giant penis and Ron Jeremy. So a few days after bringing this baby home and realizing that newborns don't much care if you need to be up at 4 a.m., I found myself dazedly, exhaustedly back on the set during Soledad's interview with Governor Romney's communications director, Eric Fernstrom. Now, this was during a period when the mainstream press was all obsessed with the question of whether Mitt Romney was conservative enough. Do you remember this? Oh, they kept asking him, "Are you conservative enough, Governor Romney?" And he kept saying, "I'm severely conservative." But, which to me just implies like Torquemada, Sith, Hitler. The conventional wisdom was that Mitt Romney flipped like a crack house mattress. The guy had changed his positions on gay rights, health care, the NRA, tax cuts, embryonic stem cell research. In my act, I was calling him reversible mittens. I mean, the guy was, no disrespect, but he was flipping on every possible topic. He was the human equivalent of a hollowed-out inflatable guy at a car dealership. Now, Romney's Republican opponents all kept hammering at the fact that he wasn't conservative enough. And the media, of course, played along. And if I had been allowed, I would have asked a totally different question, which is, hey, hasn't your guy Mitt kind of fallen into the Bob Dole trap of pretending you're more conservative than you really are? I mean, why wasn't the media asking that? You're trying to fake these right-wingers out to get the nomination, but you're not being straight with them. It's not who you really are. They'll respect you more if you can just say, "I'm not the most right-wing guy in the race, but I'm going to win this nomination, and you fuckers can get in line or not." They still wouldn't like you, but they'd respect you. So when Soledad O'Brien suddenly and inexplicably caught my eye and off camera gave me the, "Do you want to ask Mitt Romney's right-hand guy a question" look, all the depression, all the anxiety, all the fatigue blew away. I knew exactly what I wanted to ask. I knew it would be a little blunt. I couldn't come right out and just say, "Hey, isn't your guy way too right-wing and haven't y'all completely fucked up?" You can't say that. So I decided to dress up the pointedness of my question in bullshit, wordy newspeak, and in a moment of sleep-deprived hubris, I threw caution to the wind, and I Googled the exact exchange. So I'm going to read it to you verbatim, what was said. Good morning, sir. This is me. She gave me the nod, let me jump in, and I said, good morning, sir. It's fair to say that John McCain in 2008 was a considerably more moderate candidate than the one Governor Romney faces now. Isn't there a concern the pressure from Santorum and Gingrich might force the governor to tack so far to the right it would hurt him with more moderate voters in the general election? 400 words to ask a simple question. Right. Mr. Fernstrom replied, verbatim, well, I think you hit a reset button for the fall campaign. Everything changes. It's almost like an Etch A Sketch. You can kind of shake it up and start all over again. My jaw dropped. He had just admitted it, an Etch A Sketch. Mitt Romney's ideology was like the freaking guy from Memento. I leaned in to ask my follow-up question, but Soledad, to her credit, retook control of the segment, and I slumped back in my chair, wondering if anyone had caught what had just happened. At 9 a.m., I got off the air and headed back downtown to the Village to meet Charmian and the baby. And as I looked down at my phone to casually check Twitter, which you do when you're trying to wake up or fall asleep, it took a numb, slack-jawed moment to realize exactly what it was I was looking at on my phone. The #1 trending topic nationwide at 9 a.m. on all of Twitter was Etch A Sketch. The clip of our exchange had gone viral, and how. Democrats and Republicans alike were sharing it, declaring it proof that Mitt Romney changed his positions like a yoga teacher on tainted meth. By the time I got to the cafe to greet Charmian and the baby for breakfast, they were showing the clip on all the other news channels. In the cafe, another news channel was showing me as we ordered breakfast. I was being called the reporter who had provoked the first serious gaffe of the 2012 campaign. By the time I'd finished my breakfast, both Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum had been photographed holding up Etch A Sketches at rallies that morning. I don't know how they got an Etch A Sketch that early in New England in the winter. But they were doing it to mock their party's frontrunner. My email exploded. Journalists, real ones, were all wanting to talk to me about it. Dave Weigel wrote a piece for Slate that called me the comedian who ruined Mitt Romney's week. I got calls from friends in Europe who had seen the footage on their TVs. That night, that clip aired on the big 3 network newscasts, plus The Daily Show, plus Colbert. My suit and tie looked very neat, but I looked like the crypt keeper after a Gitmo sleep deprivation experiment. And I realized I was so tired from having a newborn born less than a week ago, that I could conceivably be hallucinating the entire experience. That night, brothers and sisters, Etch A Sketch sales went up 16,000% on Amazon.com. I don't know why you're clapping. I didn't say the Etch A Sketch metaphor. I own no stock in Ohio Arts, but I appreciate your zeal. Within a week, both Bill Clinton and Barack Obama had mentioned Etch A Sketch in relation to Governor Romney. All the death, all the loss, all the hustle, all the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for dinner, all the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for breakfast and lunch, all the anxiety, all the lunacy that had pushed me to the point of not giving a fuck. And now, worldwide attention. My question on this show had made the show into a little asterisk in the history of an ugly little presidential campaign. This must be what political capital feels like. The network would have to be pleased with this. On Twitter, they were bringing up TV shows I had hosted in the 90s in hate from non-millionaires who loved Romney. But I didn't mind the hate. I still get it to this day for the exchange. The network would have to be impressed. They'd have to give me a regular job on the show now. And eventually, if not give me my own show, come on, man, they'd have to at least give me a shot at getting my own show. They'd start paying me. It would be a steady gig. I could start playing bigger theaters on the weekends and finally do that political comedic talk show that I've been pitching all this time. Then we could buy a house, and in a couple of years, I'll have enough money to just write scripts and act all the time. We'd made it. It was the beginning of the end of my male provider anxiety. I wasn't going to have to sell bone marrow for diaper money. The next morning, I rose effortlessly at 4 a.m., dressed 5 feet away from a sleeping newborn in a dark studio apartment in Greenwich Village, but with a sense of purpose. I made it uptown and hid my excitement as I made my way to the studio floor, where I encountered a high-level producer for the show. So, very serious. So, we made the news yesterday. Mm-hmm. Did you see the coverage? We were on every news show in America last night. I know, the producer replied, and we'll never be able to book him on the show again. Over the next few days, I came to realize that despite shaking up the presidential race, some at the network were actually less than pleased. A lowly, unpaid comic who'd somehow been allowed to ask a question, a vulgar vaudevillian, had led to the Romney campaign being alienated from the network. My little kerfuffle might make it harder for the network to book other high-ranking campaign officials. Now, I always say, if you want to commit adultery, do it with the wife of a TV news anchor, because those guys don't enjoy asking follow-up questions. And you see, the reason some TV news anchors sometimes don't ask the tough questions is because, on occasion, some of their bosses believe in sacrificing information for access. I had gotten information. I'd caused a huge story, but I had cost them access. I had burned the contact. I had asked a fair question, and it generated legitimate controversy. I thought the media's job was to make politicians uncomfortable. But sometimes, brothers and sisters, the media's job is to do something very polite in between the Viagra and Cialis commercials. In the days that followed, I realized that my head was now on the chopping block. The anxiety, the fear, all began coming back. I began wishing there was a way I could take the whole experience and somehow make it disappear by shaking it above. No. I still needed to get paid for the 3 months I had already done on this show. When the call came, I was walking down Bleecker Street with a newborn strapped to my chest, and the producer, it was a couple weeks later, sounded almost jubilant. It's nothing but good news. They really like what you're doing, and they think it's time to transition you out of mornings. I've heard rumors. They got some really big plans for you over here, and I'm sorry we have to lose you, but I know something really good is going to happen soon. She was so convincing, it took about an hour before I realized I had just been fired. Sometimes your own individual lunacy can be so strong you don't notice you're trapped in a bigger lunacy, which could be the thing causing your lunacy in the first place. But I also learned that sometimes risk can be the safest choice. Because while risk may not always lead to the outcome you wanted, playing it safe for the sake of stability is the most effective way to hate oneself for years. I was soon offered my own primetime political comedy talk show on another network, and that sounded great. I mean, what could ever go wrong with Al Gore's current TV? But that's another, much less uplifting tale. The CNN show eventually got canceled, which was too bad. But they did wind up paying me a little for the time I'd worked, so I want to thank them for that. And a few months after that, Soledad actually came on my own show, and I got to thank her for giving me the shot. And they did wind up paying me a little bit, and I still go on CNN all the time. Maybe not after this. And I went back on the road. And over the next several months, I traveled this country in the throes of another ongoing democratic experiment, a divided populace facing an uncertain presidential election. A country at war with itself, yet totally interdependent, this eternally dividing cell, this ever-evolving, ever-devolving work in progress that is America. And as I journeyed this land trying to make sense of what my life had become and trying to figure out what it was going to become, I'm very proud to say that in the course of my traversing of this beautiful landscape, I was personally asked to sign over 75 Etch A Sketches. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight.
Let's hear it for Take a